Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast with your hosts, Andrew and Fahad Shokat. Thoughtful software is a set of values, principles, and techniques to fuel digital innovation. We want to help usher in a new approach to the way software is imagined, designed, and built. Our topic for discussion on this episode is centered around emerging tech such as computer vision, AI, NLP, and the steps to take if you want to start an emerging technology project. At the end of the day, it all comes down to playing the long game, thinking long term, and spending time where it's needed the most: discovery. Listen in as Andrew and Fahad share insight and best practices. This might be the jumpstart you need to start your new emerging tech project.
So, Andrew, let's talk about emerging tech, and let's first define what we mean by emerging tech. And currently, I would classify emerging tech as areas such as like AI, computer vision, NLP, blockchain, data architectures such as data mesh, which we've spoken about before on this podcast. And so these are emerging technologies that promise game-changing for businesses. However, the results say otherwise. I read a report that said that only 11% of companies using AI reaped a significant return on investment. That's pretty crazy, but when it comes to innovation, most projects don't even make it out of development. And this isn't surprising to us. You know, we talk to tech leaders often who share their frustration of not being able to achieve their vision. It's actually quite common. So since we have quite a bit of experience in emerging tech, it's actually something we do very well. Today, we're going to share our thoughts on how to start an emerging tech project. Andrew, why don't we start off and talk about why is it important for an enterprise or company to even consider adopting emerging tech?
Yeah, so I think we have to start with a more formal definition of emerging tech for companies, because this is important to know. I believe emerging technology is a subset of all technologies that are still in development but are in an adoption phase. So things like 5G, AI, things you talk about, things that aren't done yet. We're not even close to hitting the capabilities of 5G, and we're certainly nowhere near generalized AI. And so, as we look at emerging technology, it's important to know that it has to be both not finished and in adoption. And those two have to be true. And so as we talk about companies adopting emerging technology, I think there's a couple of struggles they have with this. The first is that it's not done. They expect it to solve all their problems, and it might solve 90% of their problem or 80% of their problem and evolve over time as it gets better, as it gets more complete, as people learn more about the technology. If you adopt 5G today, there's a good chance that your 5G changes. Remember when 4G first came out and itself was emerging technology, then they had 4G LTE, and then they had MIMO, and all these other technologies that got put on top of 4G to allow it to evolve and hit its full capabilities. Same thing's going to happen to 5G, and AI's the same as well. And so you have to build, evolutionary architectures that support that. I think the second struggle companies have with adopting it come down to the fact that it's not really widely understood. And because it's not so widely understood, they try to apply the same principles of stuff they do understand to it, like other software development practices, things that work for web apps or mobile apps, much more mature technologies. And that doesn't work either. You have to take a pretty new approach, a new type of development to best get use of emerging technology. And I don't think people have adapted their development processes and their software development life cycles to, overcome the complexities that are inherent in emerging technology.
Well, so that just go back to the question though, is like if this technology, they're not quite done, why should companies even consider it? What's driving them? What's important about these latest and greatest technologies that you should consider now, or should you wait till when they're more mature?
Oh, absolutely. You have to adopt them. Why should you consider it? I mean, it's game changing for people. I mean, one of our customers stands on the precipice of saving $12 million a year, potentially even more, with emerging technology on symbol one of their processes, right? Imagine if they applied it to all their processes, they might save hundreds of millions a year, right? This stuff can be literally transformative for companies. why else should you consider it? It gives you a massive competitive advantage, not just from a cost saving perspective, but new features that your competitors can't build because emerging technology is very difficult, because you have a particular moat because you started collecting data years ago. It really lets you differentiate your business and make you more competitive. I mean, I don't believe it's a question of whether or not you should adopt it. I think you have to adopt it, because if you don't, your competitors will. And when they adopt it, they're going to put you out of business, right? And it's going to, they're going to become a highly differentiated, high margin, high velocity business, and you won't. And so I can't imagine a world where you say, I'm not going to adopt emerging technology. I think that's a bad way of looking at it. I think it's foolish. I think it's irresponsible. I think you have to find a way to adopt this emerging technology, and it has to be part of your digital strategy. I don't think it's a question of if, it's a question of when and how.
What do you think the statistic I mentioned, like 11% of companies are not reaping any benefits from AI or any significant return on investment? Well, why do you think it's so low?
Oh, I think we constantly talk about the project failure rate, but 68% of these projects have failed. It's actually 76% for emerging technology. So we'll immediately remove 11% of people that were successful, and then add that to 76. So now we're at 87%. So now we're going to talk about the 13% of where people have built something, the project was successful, and they're reaping no benefit. So on that 13% of people that did that, did they build the right thing? Did they leverage the technology well? Or did they focus on value, as we've talked about in a previous podcast, or did they focus on some pipe dream of doing it? A lot of people jump into these projects, we'll talk about this more later, without really doing any discovery. And they don't know the problem to be solved. And so they think AI is going to be this transformative technology, and it is, but they build it in the wrong way, and it's no longer transformative. So while they have working software and they ship something, they shipped the wrong thing. And I bet the 13% is made up of a lot of people that did that. In fact, I would venture to say that the 13% of people that have no value built the wrong thing.
That's interesting. I think it's also maybe a question around expectations, because I think, from what we've seen, several people might not realize that, let's say, for example, computer vision in this particular application that they're trying to apply it may not be quite ready. It's bleeding edge. So, be just aware that it may not work. And, that these are test cases maybe, and you need to gradually adopt some different processes or different techniques within your company to make this technology work. And so I think quite often people don't really realize how hard this stuff really is.
Well, I think that just like with any technology, in particular, technology is not done yet. Remember, emerging technology isn't finished yet. There's always going to be this fog of war. I'm putting that in quotations of you don't quite know what's possible, right? The state of the art makes it sound very promising, but it might not be possible for whatever reason. It could be very possible, but it costs $30 million to do, and you don't have $30 million. Therefore, it's not possible on the time and money scale. And so I think, as you look at it, you do have to temper expectations. A lot of things are possible in technology, and with enough time and money, everything's possible, I believe. But how much time, how much money, what are our business constraints? And as you look at that, then that'll tell you whether it's feasible inside of what you have, what your constraints are. And I think people have to look at that. Again, that's part of the discovery phase that people skip, because this is so exciting. Everyone wants to get started. They want to be the people that get to market first. They feel market pressure to do that. And they rush the discovery phase when that might be the most critical phase of these kind of projects, where you truly understand the problems to be solved and how you're going to leverage the unique capabilities of emerging technology to solve that problem. And why you're leveraging it. I mean, we tell customers all the time that they don't need AI, they need if statements, right? We constantly see this where people are over leveraging technology, which is bad as under leveraging it. You're going to have complexity where you don't need it, and complexity will tear down anything great.
I think it's really interesting, the point you made, the discovery. I think that's one key takeaway on how to start an emerging tech project is never skip the discovery. And it's really around understanding where this technology fits in, how to apply it to your current business processes. So I think one of the challenges that I've seen is that companies that are most successful with adapting emerging technology most often will adapt their business process to the technology as opposed to blindly applying technology to their current business process. It's almost like they want to force technology into what they're currently doing, as opposed to shifting towards what's the best use of this emerging tech.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people, they don't want to adapt the business as well. They think they can just blindly throw technology in there and make it work. And there's a lot to be said too about companies that are trying to build AI solutions that they don't need. We talk about the build versus buy. I think that there's actually a additional cycle that great companies are starting to see dividends being paid for, which is the reuse, build, then buy, is what I'm calling it. Right? People that have invested in the API economy, people that have invested in these building blocks over time, these data lakes and these data warehouses, are starting to see the ability to reuse a lot of their intellectual property. They're seeing the ability to reuse a lot of this code. And so I think as you're looking at these emerging technologies, you should look at where you can reuse stuff and then look at where you can buy stuff and then build. But remember, we always tell people you should only build when it's going to be a core differentiator for your business. Right? If it's not how you want to do things, and it's not going to accelerate or save you money or be where you have to be in terms of being a business, don't build it, especially given emerging technology and the inherent risk with the projects. They don't have to be risky, but I mean, people try to build things that they just have no right building, and it causes failure. And to your point, they build them and then they try to jam them into these into their existing processes when they need to adapt both the processes and the tech together as a collaborative unit.
I think there's a big problem there, right? Where you're asking a corporation, especially some of these big Fortune 500s, to really change their mindset on how they adopt technology. And I think the best most successful use cases that we've seen is that they take maybe a small incremental approach, and they don't treat like innovation and emerging tech as this big giant initiative. Maybe potentially they start with POCs or MVPs within smaller groups. Do you find that have you seen that as well? And what else could companies do to kind of step towards emerging technology?
Well, I think you're exactly right. You have to start with a proof of concept. What exactly problem are you going to try to solve? Again, you're trying to remove that fog of war. What's possible, what's not possible. And to do that, you want to do it in the cheapest, risk-free way possible, right? Regardless if you're buying or building, right? Regardless, you need to do a proof of concept. You cannot just jump into an emerging technology product that you think is going to solve your problem. You might not even fully understand your problem yet. And so proof of concepts are a part of the discovery phase, in my opinion, and answers a very key question, which is it possible to leverage technology to solve this problem? And if the answer is yes, the next part of discovery is then, is it worth solving this problem? Right? Again, you can't solve $1 million problem with a $10 million solution, right? There's no point in doing that. You lose $9 million. And so, you have to look at, is it feasible? And if it's feasible, then I believe you should pursue the minimum viable product, build small building blocks and build on top of it. I think one of the things people really love doing are these big bang, exciting projects. Like, we're going to rewrite our entire platform, or the business version of that. We're going to digitally transform. Digital transformation is probably one of the most leading terms on the planet. Digital transformation, in my mind, is an incremental. It's forever, right? You don't stop. It's just like being fit, right? Like, I'm not fit, but you are. It's not like you wake up one day, you run 5 miles, you eat really well, and now all of a sudden you're fit for the rest of your life, right? You have to eat well every day. You have to work out every day. You have to, it's a series. It's almost a lifestyle, right? And the same thing with digital, right? You have to do it every day. You have to figure out where you're going to invest in digital things. And emerging technologies are part of that building block, part of that transformation. And that's why you need investment incrementally and over time with these small building blocks that you can begin to reuse, and they build on top of each other. And then each subsequent investments become cheaper and they become safer. And if you do it that way, you end up winning in a big way. It's the same thing that we talked about, the same strategy to rewriting a platform, but instead of the platform, it's your business.
That's a really interesting question around there. How do you balance whether a technology or this project is feasible when you don't quite understand what the technology is capable of? If it's not fully done, like say, take computers and vision, for example, we want to apply this technology towards some inventory management system of scanning a specific item. That's something, this technology has never been used for before. And we project possibly that, we'd get 40 to 50% accuracy on scanning these items. How do you know that if that's going to be feasible, or later down the road you could have better accuracy, or whether you should even continue? Would that be considered good? How do you balance that?
I think it becomes a value proposition, right? We know how to build business cases, and we know how to build business cases around anything else. And you can't throw away business cases with regards to emerging technology. Is 50% accuracy solve 60% of the work? 60% of the work costs $5 million, and it's going to cost you $3 million to build this. If you don't build that, you are bad at business. You don't want to save $2 million a year, which I think makes you bad at business. And so, I mean, you can build a business case. You just have to do it mathematically. You have to do it with good, sound business principles, and you have to look at it. How much of this problem does this solve? Does it solve all of it? Great. How much is the problem we're solving? What percentage of it? And just work backwards from there. That's how you know if something's feasible or not. And I think a lot of people, again, that's part of discovery, though. And they skip that phase because that's not the fun phase. Everyone wants to build things. Everyone wants to have these amazing projects and have these incredible innovations. They want them yesterday. But if you skip that discovery phase, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know if it's valuable. You don't know if it's even good. And there's times when you build something to seem innovative in the market, but that's theater. That's innovation theater. And innovation theater doesn't make for good business 90% of the time.
Yeah, one interesting thing there is that I think a lot of companies should definitely embrace the idea of augmentation, this blending of humans and machines, as opposed to assuming that like computer vision is going to fully automate your entire system. There is going to be some manual processes. You can't just fully eliminate, a human doing that scan as well. There's going to be, some support there. There's going to be, you're going to have to fill in that 50% gap somehow. And so I think that would be part of the discovery and expectations that this is not going to solve everything. This is a blend of those two.
Oh yeah, the amount of change management that doesn't go into AI, it's fascinating to me that people are constantly thinking about replacing jobs, replacing this, saving money that way. Yeah, that can be the result of some of these AI projects. I'm not going to lie, it can happen. But the vast majority of them should be looking about how I optimize my own people. Like you said, augmenting people. These people are subject matter experts for replacing them with. And you're not going to replace the creativity, the knowledge, the muscle memory of these people with AI. I mean, simply not in a lot of cases. And I don't think you want to. I think people are critical in the success of business. And so I think people need to think about how they change manage with these type of solutions, because they do automate a lot of people's jobs away. And so how are you going to reuse their time that you get back? How are you going to help them get better? And the answer could be, okay, we're going to reduce our staff by 50% and we're going to change the jobs you have. That happens a lot, and that might be the right thing to do. But on the other hand, maybe there's a job that's not being done today that can make the business a better place. And that's part of change management, explaining to these people how this works, how it's going to make them better, getting them to champion the technology internally. A lot of people fail to make champions, and they end up losing their user base because people hate it. They don't want to adopt it. You need these people to come in and say, no, this is actually good for us. This is good for our jobs. This is good for our sanity. This is good for doing the parts of the job that no one wants to do. Right. And, there's a lot there. And I think change management, especially around technology, usually isn't very good. Like, it's just not something that I think our industry has really matured. And then as technology moves faster, I think people get more and more away from the change management aspect that's very human and very important.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, so just quick summary. make sure you emphasize discovery. You can't skip discovery. Start with like POCs, small incremental projects and investments into emerging technology. Set expectations that augmentation and that blend is critical to the key success. It's not going to fully automate everything. I guess then when you do run discovery for these particular projects, often like AI, NLP, computer vision require a lot of data to be successful. So when you're in that discovery and you don't have access to millions of images or millions of, documents, how do you actually reconcile that with this small piece of data? We can get something better out of it if we had more access to more data. Like, how do you make that stretch?
I think it's a case by case basis. Some companies have data silos. In fact, most companies do. The sales have their sales system. Marketing has their system. Like, especially the big Fortune 500, they tend to have a lot of data silos. Some of the smaller billion-dollar SMBs, larger 100 million, we'll say 100 million to $1 billion SMBs, their CIOs tend to be able to create data lakes and just talk to the head of sales and get everyone to put in there. But the large businesses, they have these fiefdoms and they have politics and all of that, and it's hard to open up those data lakes. So as you're looking in the discovery phase for data, you have to even know if you can get access to it, right? Even if it's not going to be helpful, what data do you have access to and what's there? And again, I think it comes down to the problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to predict sales numbers and you don't have access to the CRM, you're not going to predict sales numbers. And there are tons of other places that data lives too, right? I bet the marketing system, how the leads come into the sales system, that matters. So you're going to want access to the market. And it's really easy to look across the enterprise on what data you need for the problem you're going to solve. But you really need to understand what problem you're solving. I just said, hey, we want to know our sales numbers. But is that really what you're trying to solve? You want to know how much a salesperson is going to close this quarter? No, you want to know how much you're going to close this quarter. You don't care about individual salespeople. You want to look at your deals in aggregate, which is a different problem than the deals in by a salesperson, right? And so you really want to look at, deal health and things like that. And that might require knowing where the lead came from. What's the success rate when it comes from that channel? There's a lot of downstream facts to make that kind of judgment call, kind of AI type system. Continuing on that train, it's the same thing with anything else. You might have access to the data, but the data could be complete garbage. We've talked about data swamps before, and you could have access to all the data in the data lake, but it's a swamp. And so, what are you going to do to get your data out of that? You have to clean it up. You have to potentially impute data. You might have to do a lot of cleanup to do that. And that's part of discovery as well. If we're going to create a model, we know we need these data points and all that. A lot of the data science stuff that gets done in discovery is really looking at data. What data do I have? What do I need to do to the data to clean it up? Where can I get the data from? Do I even have access to that data? Who do I request it from? All that happens in discovery, and it's all a very important data science problem, along with a business management problem. And, it's definitely, again, that's why you want to do discovery. You might create a proof of concept based on a fake data and find out that it works, only to be found it can't work here because we have policies that prevent us from doing it. So, that can happen. We've seen it happen before, actually.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One thing, as you were saying, that I started thinking about was around prediction and prediction models, right? Requiring a lot of data. And humans notoriously are terrible at predicting the future, but somehow the data that we've created, we assume that machines are going to be better at it. Do you think that's even possible? Because a lot of these companies, they venture into emerging like machine learning and want to aggregate all this data and then be able to make predictions and then decisions off of that. Like how far is that technology, and is it really possible to make solid predictive decisions?
I think that involves an orderly universe. And no one wants to believe this, but I believe we live in chaos. And because we live in chaos, we things are stochastic, right? They're random. And because things are random, it's hard to predict things, right? Look, if you look at our sales pipeline, some of our large deals closed within weeks. Some of the other ones closed in 6 months. Can you create a prediction line on that? No, you can't. And the thing that's really difficult is people have had the ability to predict. Trend lines have been around since statistics, right? Like you can create trend lines for how things are going. And, trend lines are very wrong because, for example, if you trend line out the Dow Jones average at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, you think by now it would have been super high in like record numbers. And then COVID hit, Black Swan event prevented any amount of prediction from happening. And that's just a stochastic event that you can't predict. And so I think there is some amount of prediction that can occur. There's some amount of trends, but I think the important thing to look at with AI is finding those trends and finding those correlations in data, and then improving outcomes that then become predictive, a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you can improve outcomes around a thing that you want to try to predict, and you say, hey, if I improve this outcome by 10%, then I will improve this metric. And that's where I think computers are really good at looking across very large data sets and finding those correlations and finding out what levers I can pull and by how much to get where I want to go. And that I think is powerful and helps you improve outcomes at your business, which then will become a predictor, because if you can improve outcomes, there's no reason to believe that the end result won't be improved as well. And then because you can find correlation, you can find the correlation by changing this 10%, my outcome gets 2% better, right? And it's predictive then, but they're still like, can you really predict anything? And I think the answer is no, because if you can predict things and you can predict the future, and I'm wondering why no one's telling me how to become a trillionaire, because, if you can, let me know. And, finance has been trying to do this for how long, right? And hedge funds are really good at this. But even the best hedge funds, like Bridgewater Capital, lost money last year, right? And they're so hedged against the ups and the downs of the economy, trying to be predictive of history. And they're wrong, right? The greatest minds in our industry are wrong about it. And in other industries too. I don't think there is any amount of predictiveness in a stochastic world that can be reliable. And I don't think anyone should try to rely on it.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I think one important point you're making is that as we've talked about before, is like just incremental, small changes, small advances. Like, our desire for this one technology to completely solve our problems, and we make this amazing press release about, look, all this cool shit that we did. That's not really going to happen, and we have to be comfortable with a 2% incremental improvement in efficiency, or $10 million this year in improvement based on this technology. And then as it advances, all this kind of compounds on itself, and then you might get better results the following year. And so you won't really have this big game changer, even though we're talking about game changer all at once, but it will happen over time as you become more patient and methodically start adopting these technologies.
Correct. And, you look at what makes Tesla such a great company is that they can ship incremental, improvements to their cars over the air. And no other car company can do that, or say they can do that at the moment. And that makes them better, right? Instead of having to go buy the new model of a car, my old model just gets better. No other car can say that. And if you look at what SpaceX has done, maybe this is just Elon's philosophy, they didn't start by taking people into space. They started by taking satellites, cheap satellites, then expensive satellites, then lots of satellites, then cargo, now people, right? It was incremental improvement as they also improved the underlying systems to build the trust. And now they've had 2 manned missions to the Space Center, and they're continuing to get more contracts. And they're one of the most trusted companies on the planet because of it, right? And that's huge. But that's a testament to incremental improvement. And it didn't all happen at once. They crashed rockets. They did all that. And now they're at a really great place. But there's something to be said about incremental improvement over the span of time and reinvestment into products. That's why having a product mindset is so important in the day of emerging technology. If you have a project mindset, like I'm going to build this thing and be done with it, then it never evolves. But if you have an evolutionary mindset where you're constantly evolving your platform, constantly adding new features, adding new building blocks, adding new primitives, building this API economy, then you get huge returns down the road. You are better fitted. to be more competitive in your market. And the best part is, as your market changes too, because all markets evolve too, just at different rates, you'll be able to adapt. You'll be much more adaptable than, say, someone that has a project mindset that sits there and does one thing and shelves it. And I think the companies that really win here in emerging technology have that continual growth, continual, evolution in mind, knowing that emerging technologies, the AI you have today, will be radically better in a year. And after that, it'll be radically better as well. I mean, look at CPUs. Intel was dominating for years and years and years and years and years. And now Apple comes out with a computer that is actually better than an Intel computer, right? All the benchmarks say so. That's insane. Intel was the darling of the Silicon world. And now Apple has supplanted them, right? And that's insane when you think about what that means in terms of evolution on what they're building. And that's going to enable new technologies, better AI and things. And so we're now in a world of just, as CPUs, GPUs, cloud providers provide more resources, get better technologies, you have to continue to evolve. You have to continue to look at emerging technology, not just once. AI doesn't solve all your problems today, because it gets better all the time. And that's the point of emerging technology, is that's not done yet. The 5G isn't going to be done as soon as we get a network here, just like 4G wasn't. We're going to install millimeter wave technology. We're going to get in there and we're going to expand how it penetrates walls.
I heard about 6G.
I mean, someone's going to invent 6G, right? We're never going to stop doing it. So you can't stop and think about this as a project, but what is my technology vision and how I'm going to continually invest in this digital vision I have and keep getting better at it. And if you have that mindset, you will win. You'll be a digital company. You'll be able to compete, and the emerging technologies will work for you instead of against you.
Yeah, I like that, because I think if we answer our question here, how to start an emerging tech project, maybe it's like, play the infinite game, play the long game. That's the first place to start. And like to your point, that's where it's going to be at, because it's not going to end. Even if we've talked about companies trying to adopt virtual machines, and containers came out, and this, so like they've stuck on one thing, but it's already evolving past that, even to the next thing. So just have that infinite game mindset. One other thing I wanted to ask you about was around off the shelf models with these emerging technologies, or kind of building your own custom solutions, which could be potentially expensive, and you may not have the expertise in-house. Like, where do you fall on that?
It depends on the problem. It depends on what you're trying to solve. How generalized is it? And whether or not a model will work. A lot of deep learning is actually done on pre-made models. And so like Google has on TensorFlow created hundreds of models that you can pull off the shelf, and then other open source authors have also created them. And then you can train on top of those to add new classifiers and things like that on top of it. And because it's pre-built, they have different properties in how they were built and different tunings. And so they're advantageous. And a lot of people use those off the shelf models. So it's important to know that the basis for a lot of things are open source base models built on top of that. We, on some of our problems, we've used some of those base models. On some of our other problems, we haven't, and we've gone with a completely custom model. It just depends on the type of performance needed, speed, and all that stuff. If there's a highly tunable problem, we'll build a very custom model to it, because we can tune it to get the exact performance we need out of it, and make our own trade-offs. Remember, because just computer science is a game of trade-offs. As for generalized models in terms of off-the-shelf products, a lot of these products are custom, and a lot of people don't realize that. Yeah, they give you all the scaffolding to annotate images and do this and that, but at the end of the day, the heavy lifting is not really the software part. It's all the training and the change management and the rollout of these type of solutions. And you don't get a lot of gains out of a computer vision platform at the moment, because it's just the way training and all that stuff works. So there's not really off-the-shelf models that solve these things. They're built over time inside these platforms, custom to your data. We'll see if that changes, but right now, most things are custom tailored towards a data set, just because most people's cases are just unique enough that a generalized model won't perform very well.
Yeah, this is great. And I think, this kind of circles back to what we say about thoughtful software and the approach, taking a more incremental, methodical approach to technology, understanding the why, then understanding the what, then developing your roadmap. Do all that before you even start development. And, successful innovation is incremental. And we do have to prepare our employees and everyone else around us for this eventual change, which is happening all the time. As we wrap up, what's your kind of advice to companies that feel that this change is scary and, but it is within their possibility that they can adopt emerging technology and they can make this change?
I think anything scary should be done one step at a time, right? I think I define fear as not the lack of courage. I think fear is natural, and courage isn't the lack of that, it's overcoming it. And I think you just have to take one step at a time, de-risk it, right? I think there's a point where you have to dive in to at least one concept, which is the world's going digital, whether you want to or not. Right? If you were the guy that said smartphones were a fad, boy, do you look wrong. And there were people that said the internet was a fad too, right? And I'm sure there were people that said cars were a fad, right? If you're saying this emerging technology, this 5G, this AI is never going to happen, you are woefully wrong. And you will be put out of business. And there's nothing anyone can do to save you, right? You're not going to listen to me and you're not going to listen to everyone else. But if you're one of those people on the fence, it's time to invest now. It's time to overcome the fear and start investing. And if you're like, I'm not sure how to invest, take incremental steps, small steps towards it. Get our CRM in place, start collecting data, start seeing the small things that can occur. And then I think as you start thinking about digital technologies and you start installing these things, it gets easier and easier because the compounding results of all the digital technology. So my advice is just start small. Like one small investment's all you really need to continue down that road. And it's one small investment at a time. It doesn't have to be a $25 million digital transformation. It doesn't have to be this big press release event. It can be something that you say, hey, I'm really interested in this. I think it can be transformative. I want to give it a try. And you give it a try. And if you're wrong, you didn't lose too much. But if you're right, you can be one of the company, one of those 11%, and hopefully as Skip List grows, that number increases exponentially from 11%. Hopefully we can save more companies. As that happens, you'll be joining the legion of people seeing the, tremendous gains of having this kind of technology.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.